My name is Megan Kessler, and I was 37 years old the day my father told me a tractor mattered more than my leg. I was standing in my parents' kitchen on a wet Thursday night in Richland County, Ohio, leaning on a borrowed cane and asking for $4,100 to keep an infection in my right ankle from getting into the joint. I had the number written on a yellow legal pad. I had a repayment plan. I had interest worked out. I had the title to my truck folded in an envelope if they wanted collateral. My father never looked at the paper. He stood by the sink with both hands braced on the counter and looked out over the gravel toward the equipment shed. My mother kept folding and unfolding the same dish towel like she was waiting for it to turn into a different kind of cloth. And my father said, in the same voice a man might use to mention rain coming in, "We just bought the tractor." My mother nodded once and said, "Maybe being slowed down would teach you not to carry everything like you own the place." My older brother was on speakerphone from Bucyrus. He let out this little breath laugh and said I'd figured out, because I always did. Then headlights rolled up the driveway. My younger cousin Eli climbed out of a rusted-out Silverado with an empty trailer behind it, walked straight through the side yard without taking his hat off, and handed me a bank envelope with $600 inside. He said he'd sold his hunting quad. What none of us knew standing in that kitchen was that the paperwork had already been signed 4 months earlier. And what I did about it later is the part one still replay when I wake up at 3:17 in the morning with my back locked and my right foot burning. Welcome back to the stories people don't post while they're living them. The quiet family betrayals. The ones that happen at kitchen tables and in parking lots and shop offices that smell like oil and burnt coffee. The kind that don't look dramatic from the outside until one ordinary afternoon turns around and shows you what was being built behind your back the whole time. If you've ever been the one carrying the load while somebody else got the title, stay with me. The Kessler repair yard sat behind my parents' house on 9 acres off State Route 314, tucked behind a row of dying pines and a chain-link fence my grandfather put up himself in 1972. By spring of 2025, we were 10 people doing just under $2 million a year in heavy equipment repair, structural field work, and custom fabrication for farms and contractor outfits all through north central Ohio. Nothing glamorous. Dump bodies, hydraulic repairs, loader buckets, catwalks, broken trailer frames. The kind of work that keeps other people moving and never gets photographed unless something goes wrong. I handled compliance, estimates, safety logs, customer walkdowns, vendor orders, and most of the code paperwork nobody else wanted to touch. I also welded better than anyone in that yard, which is not the sort of thing a woman is supposed to say out loud in a business run by men who believe humility only counts if it comes from you and never from them. So I'll say it once and move on. That Tuesday morning, I was out by Bay 3 checking a cracked stabilizer arm off a county backhoe when the pallet rack behind me shifted. We'd been overloading that rack for years. Hydraulic cylinders on the top level, gearboxes on the second, boxes of pins and couplers stuffed wherever they fit. I had written it up on 2 safety walk reports. Both times, my father skimmed the sheet, folded it in half, and said we'd move things around when the spring rush let up. Spring rush never lets up in a yard like that. A boxed planetary hub dropped off the second shelf, hit the edge of the work table, and came down hard on my right ankle. I heard the crack before I understood it was mine. There is always a sound first. That part is true. Then this sharp, clean, white pain that feels too exact to belong to a body. Eli got a strap around my calf while Nate ran for the office. My father came out at a dead sprint, dropped to one knee in the gravel beside me, and put his hand on my shoulder. The first thing he said was not, "Are you okay?" It was not, "Call the squad." It was not, "I'm sorry." What he said was, "Don't start talking about the rack when the medics get here." I want to be fair to him, so I'll tell you the truth exactly the way it happened. He said it fast. Instinctive. The way a person might slap a wasp off a child's neck before they had time to think. But he said it. And once a sentence like that gets said, it does not go back in the mouth. He rode with me to the ER in Mansfield. He stayed until nearly midnight. They told me it was a shattered distal fibula with ligament damage and probable contamination in the wound because of the yard debris and grease. They stabilized it, cleaned it, put me under the next morning, and installed hardware. Around 11 that night, half-lit on pain meds and still clear enough to think straight, I asked him whether he'd filed the first report of injury. I knew the process. I had filed them for other men in that yard. He said, "We'll keep it off workers' comp, put it through the health plan, and I'll make it right." I said the state fund covered workplace injuries and that this was not optional. He said, "Monday." I made him repeat it. When I got home 4 days later, I wrote BWC on the wall calendar in my kitchen in pencil on the Monday square. 2 weeks after that, I asked again, standing in the front office with my foot in a boot and my hands shaking from trying not to put weight on it. My father tore a number off the bottom of an invoice and handed it to me like that settled it. I saved it in my phone under claim. I want you to understand this because people are always quick after the fact. I checked. I asked. I wrote it down. I asked again. I kept that number in my phone for months and did not find out what it really was until the incision started draining and my ankle started running hot. The yard couldn't function without me for long. I was back in 6 weeks on a stool behind the service desk because nobody else could read the insurance certificates, keep the county contract straight, and write change orders without either giving work away or starting fights on the phone. My father cleaned off a long steel table himself and set a stool there so I could sit and work with my foot up. That's the kind of man he was. And the trouble with men like that is the kindness is real. It's just never as complete as the damage. Behind that table was the wall everybody saw when they came in. If you've never worked in a yard or a fab shop, here is something worth knowing. Men hang different kinds of proof where they can see it. Service plaques, old permits, photos with cranes, bent coupons from weld tests, broken tools that survived the job. My grandfather, Walter Kessler, nailed a line of stamped steel tags along that wall starting in 1973. Every qualification plate, every job medal, every county inspection pass. Little bits of metal with names and dates that turned ordinary work into family legend if you stood there long enough and listened to the right man talk. Walter's name ran across the top. My father's line came under that. Then men who stayed 6 months. Men who stayed 20 years. Men who drank too much and were still the best hand in the county until their shoulder gave out. And then there was a strip about 5 feet across that was almost all mine. 2008 when I passed my first structural plate test. 2010, 2013, 2017. 2 more from 2021 when I sat for my compliance certification and started signing inspection paperwork myself. For years, my father used to walk customers past that wall, tap that section with 2 fingers, and say, "That's my girl's work." Then he'd say the line my grandfather used to say, "Steel doesn't care whose daughter you are." He meant it as pride. I carried it as pride. I did not understand until much later that a sentence can sound like equality while still being spoken inside a house that has already chosen where the deed is going. By late August, the skin above the outside plate on my ankle had turned hot and angry. Then it started weeping. I ran a fever for 2 days and went in. Dr. Ellen Markham is an orthopedic trauma surgeon, and she has the kind of face that tells the truth without ever raising its voice. She put the images up, pointed to the clouding near the hardware, and told me the infection had gotten into the joint space and was threatening the bone. She said they needed to go back in. Debridement. Hardware revision. For antibiotics. I asked how soon. She said, "Soon enough that if we wait, the conversation changes." She didn't say fusion. She didn't say long-term disability. She didn't say permanent damage. She didn't have to. The surgery center called Thursday afternoon. Because the injury had already been flagged as work-related by my health insurer, they would not finalize it under the plan. They wanted the unresolved patient balance up front before scheduling. $4,100. I called the insurance line and got a woman who was polite and completely immovable. She told me the claim belonged with workers' comp. She told me to resolve it through the bureau. So I called. I gave them my name, my date of birth, the number my father tore off the invoice. The woman on the line put me on hold for 3 minutes and 20 seconds. I remember because I watched the microwave clock over my stove while I stood there with my foot throbbing. When she came back, she said there had never been a claim under my name. Not denied. Not pending. Not misfiled. It simply did not exist. The number in my phone was a parts order for a Komatsu final drive. I had $1,180 in savings. My truck payment was due in 10 days. My surgery window was closing. So I drove the 4 miles over to my parents' place with my legal pad on the passenger seat and my pride packed down so tight it felt like a second brace around my ribs. I didn't sit. I stood at the end of the kitchen table and laid it out like a bid package because that is the only language I was ever taught for asking. The number, the deadline, what the infection meant, what the surgery was for, then the plan. I would sign a note. 8%. Monthly payments starting November 1st. They could hold my truck title until it was cleared. My mother folded the towel smaller and smaller in her hands. My father looked out toward the gravel. And then he said they'd just bought the tractor. It was a used John Deere 5075E sitting under the shed with fresh rear tires and a loader bucket they did not need. $22,000, maybe more. He said it the way a man says he already mailed the check. My mother said being slowed down might teach me not to think sacrifice made me indispensable. My brother on speaker gave that little laugh and said I'd manage because I always did. That was all of them, right there inside a minute and a half. And I wish I could tell you I said the perfect thing. I didn't. I asked my mother for a glass of water. She got me one. I drank it standing there. Set the glass in the sink. Said thank you for hearing me out. Then I walked out the side door into the damp air and down the gravel toward my truck. My father followed me as far as the step and said he'd make a few calls, maybe find out if the surgery center would work with me. I said that would be kind. That is what I said. Halfway to my truck, another set of headlights came up the driveway. It was Eli. My cousin was 32, single, worked nights for the county road crew, and never once in his life managed to hide what he was feeling from anybody. He pulled up beside my truck, shut the engine off hard enough to rock the cab, and got out with that envelope in his hand. The trailer behind him was empty. That morning, it had been carrying the old hunting quad he'd rebuilt with his uncle when he was 19. He put the envelope in my hand and said, I sold it. I counted it later. $600. He said it was all he could get fast. I tried to hand it back and he stepped out of reach in one easy move, the kind a man can do when the woman in front of him is on a cane and can't pivot. He asked if the claim number my dad gave me had worked out. That's when I understood he thought it was real. He had been carrying that lie around like a fact because of course he had. It came from an older man in the family. That's all it took. I told him it was being handled. I lied because I still had not figured out what admitting the truth would require for me. I used the $600, my savings, and the money I got the next day selling my portable service compressor and field torch rig to a man out of Galleon who knew perfectly well he was buying it cheap. That setup was my back door. My side work lifeline. The only reason I could ever have left my family's yard and eaten. I sold it in 12 minutes anyway. The surgery happened on October 11th. It took longer than expected, which is a sentence you never want repeated to you in recovery. Dr. Markham cleaned out more infected tissue than the scans had shown. She revised the hardware, placed a drain, started the antibiotics, and sent me home with a PICC line in my arm and instructions that sounded manageable only if you had not yet tried to sleep with a line near your heart and your foot pulsing like a separate animal. For 6 weeks, I hung 4 bags in a recliner by my living room window and timed them with the same little digital timer I used in the yard for heat checks and cure windows. Around day 8, the irony seemed funny. Around day 21, it didn't. My old dog June, half-deaf and graying around the muzzle, slept against the side of that recliner every single night. My mother came twice. Both times, she brought casseroles and said very little. Both times before she left, she asked if I had thought about whether resentment was slowing my healing. My father never came inside, but every Friday for 2 months, Eli showed up and put $30 worth of gas in my truck and left without ever calling it help. That is how some men apologize for belonging to the same family as the damage. And the whole time, I still worked. Nobody asked me to. That's the part that matters. Nobody had to. There was no one else who knew how to keep the municipal quotes straight, renew the vendor packets, update the training logs, and answer the county road superintendent when he called wanting to know why a repair unit wasn't back in service. So, I did the work from my recliner. And because I did, the yard billed right around $96,000 that October. I want to be honest about why I kept doing it. I thought I was making a deposit. I thought someday, when the time came, somebody in that family would balance the ledger and remember who kept the place standing when I could barely walk to the bathroom. My brother came over once in November with a carry-out box of ribs and a grocery sack full of paper towels because his wife had sent him with something useful. He sat on the edge of the sofa like a man waiting for news after a storm and finally said, very gently, "You know Dad was never giving you that yard, right?" There are sentences that land like insults. And there are sentences that land like weather reports. That was the second kind. I asked who he meant to give it to then. My brother shrugged. Not cruelly. Almost sadly. And I understood then that he knew something casually, which is how you know it's been said out loud in that family more than once. 3 weeks later, I found out what it was. The annual liability renewal came to my email because for 8 years my address had been the compliance contact on nearly everything going in and out of that yard. I opened the document on a Tuesday morning with the PICC line still in my arm and skimmed the limits, dates, endorsements, additional insureds. Then I hit the named insured line. Kessler Equipment Repair LLC, Evan Kessler, managing member. Not my father. Not my father and mother. My brother. My first thought was that the agency had typed it wrong. I actually started writing the correction email. Then I stopped. Because agencies do not invent managing members. They copy what the state has on file. I opened the Ohio Business Search, typed in the company name, and there it was in black and white. Amendment filed May 29th, 2025. Membership interest transferred. Evan Kessler, sole member. My father had signed the whole place over while I was still on crutches. Then 4 months later, he sat at a kitchen table and listened to me explain what infection can do to a joint and told me about a tractor. I printed the filing and set it on my kitchen table. Not because I needed proof for court. There was no case in that moment. I printed it because some betrayals are too large to hold in your head without putting them on paper first. The next morning, I drove to the yard and asked my father one question. The front office smelled like gear oil and stale coffee the way it had since I was 13 years old. He was sitting at the desk with a yellow pencil in his hand. I said the filing date out loud and asked why he never told me. He didn't deny it. He didn't ask how I found out. Those two things told me more than any speech ever could. He opened the drawer under the desk, took out an old brass tag from a transmission bench my grandfather rebuilt in the 80s, and turned it in his fingers like it carried scripture on it. Then he said, "A yard goes to a son." That was it. Not anger. Not apology. Not embarrassment. Just certainty. He said it the way a man says frost is coming. I stood there long enough to understand that no argument in the world reaches a person who mistakes inheritance for weather. Then I said okay. I went out into the main bay, stood in front of that wall, grabbed an empty milk crate, and started taking down every tag with my name on it. The men in the yard stopped what they were doing one by one. No one asked what I was doing because everybody there already knew what had happened. Maybe not the filing date. Maybe not the legal language. But the shape of it. Men in shops always know the shape of a thing long before anyone says it. Each tag hit the bottom of that crate with the same small hard sound. 2008, 2010, 2013, 2017, 2021. Every bit of metal with my name stamped on it went into the crate, and nothing else. I did not touch my grandfather's. I did not touch my father's. I did not touch the tags belonging to men who left before I was old enough to drive. Only mine. I carried that crate to my truck. It sat on the passenger seat for nearly 3 months. That crate is how I learned the exact shape of what had been mine all along, and the exact shape of what had never been. By January, the infection was under control, but the damage was done. Dr. Markham told me the joint had lost more than they wanted. My gait would change. I'd likely limp permanently. A lift in the boot would help my back. It would not give me back what delay had taken. My mother once said being slowed down would teach me responsibility. On that point, in the cruelest way possible, she was right. I went back part-time in February. Somebody had moved the stool from my desk. My brother was sitting in the owner's chair in a clean work shirt looking like a man who had put on a coat cut for somebody else. To be fair to him, I'll tell you this plainly. My brother is a good mechanic. Fast hands. Strong instincts. Good with metal. Good with men. He can diagnose half a hydraulic issue by sound alone. What he cannot do is paper. Within a week, he was at my elbow 10 times a day. What code applied here? Which inspection packet went to which county? What wording the state wanted on an invoice? Why continuity logs mattered? Why vendor certs had to be current before a school district would sign off? He had spent his whole life doing the work with his hands. He had never once been made to learn the names of the systems holding that work together, because for years the person who knew them was standing 20 feet away. The third week back, he shut the office door and told me he had not asked for the transfer. He said Dad brought papers over on a Thursday in May and told him to sign. He signed. His wife cried afterward, and he thought it was because she was happy. He asked if I was mad at him, and I told him no. That was the worst part. Because as long as I was angry at him, he was still my brother standing somewhere inside the same storm. The moment I stopped being angry, he became the man on the other side of the desk. In March, one of our biggest county jobs landed. A road department facility expansion near Shelby. Roughly $780,000 in shop work, rails, catwalks, service platforms, plus field fixes. It should have been a celebration. Instead, it was the thing that made me pull open a file I hadn't looked at in 2 years. A previous municipal platform job. Thick plate connections. Procedural notes. Heat guidance. Inspection logs. I don't know what made me open it. Some jobs rhyme with older jobs. The same way a smell can drag a memory across a room. I read one of my own old procedure sheets and felt my stomach drop. A minimum heat value I had written years earlier was low.
Not wildly,
Not cartoonishly.
but low.
Low enough that if the material thickness matched what I remembered, the procedure needed review. I was halfway to the code shelf when the office phone rang, and my brother called my name with that panic tone he gets when a customer corners him on something he should already know. I turned around. I answered the phone. That night, I printed the file and set it on top of a cabinet in the spare room at home. It sat there for months. Remember that. Because later, that file would cost me more than money. Mid-March got ugly fast. We lost 2 experienced men in 3 weeks. One retired. One left for better pay in Columbus. That left us short right when the county work started moving. One Wednesday, my father walked into my office, laid a blank qualification form on the desk, and told me to sign off on my brother for a process test I had not actually witnessed. He said I had watched that boy weld his whole life and knew he could do it. He was not entirely wrong. What he was wrong about was what my signature meant. My signature does not mean I believe somebody can do it. It means I watched it happen.
It means I verified it.
It means I am willing to put my number under it. I said no twice. Then for the first time in my life, I said the second half of the family line out loud. I said, Steele doesn't care whose son he is either. My father picked up the form, squared it against the edge of the desk, and walked out without another word. Sunday dinner still happened. I still went, which surprises people. But 4 miles is 4 miles, and I had not yet become the kind of daughter who stays away before the final break. That night, the room was tight before the plates even hit the table. My mother said everybody in that yard had given something to keep it alive. My brother said he was trying. My father talked about fluid prices and ignored the real subject like a man stepping neatly around a hole he dug himself. Out the window, under the shed, sat that tractor with mud still not on its tires. And something in me went quiet. The next morning, I handed my brother a resignation letter with 30 days' notice, because he was the owner, and that is who resignation letters go to. Then I handed my father 2 pages. Page 1 listed every compliance item the yard would need to maintain after my departure and the cost of replacing outside support. Page 2 listed every current qualification, every lapse date, every inspection duty, every contract clause tied to current compliance, and the insurance audit dates already on the calendar. At the bottom, I wrote one plain sentence. All current records remain in file cabinets 1 and 2, printed, labeled, and in order as of this date. I read page 1 out loud. My father folded both pages in half and slid them into the chest pocket of his shirt without reading them. He said, "We'll be fine. My dad ran this place with a pencil." 30 days later, I walked out carrying one milk crate of tags and one plastic wallet card with my certification number on it. Everything else I left squared up, labeled, and in order. The day after my last shift, I sent 2 letters. One to the county project manager, one to the certification body. Both said the same thing. As of this date, I am no longer employed by Kessler Equipment Repair. As of this date, I am no longer acting as their compliance representative. Any record after this date does not carry my verification. Please update your files. No accusations. No family story. No mention of the tractor. No mention of my father. Just the paperwork a person is required to do if they intend to keep their own name clean. A former mentor of mine, Janice Cole, read both letters over diner coffee and handed them back to me with one question. "Do they understand what you just took away?" I said, "They think I took a mug off the shelf." The county manager replied in 13 minutes asking who would be replacing me. That did not feel good. It felt like turning off lights in a building I had helped wire. That same Monday, with 9 days left before the filing deadline, I filed my own workers' comp report online. In Ohio, you can do that yourself. That matters, so I'm saying it plainly. If your employer tells you they're handling it in-house, check anyway. I entered the date of injury, the failed rack, the earlier safety notes,
The ER.
the hardware, the infection, the delayed revision, the surgery center payment. Then I printed a copy, drove to the yard, and put it in my brother's hand because he was the owner and deserved to know before the mail told him. He stood in the gravel reading the first page in the rain and asked in a voice so small I almost did not recognize it whether he was going to be in trouble. I told him probably some. Then I told him I was filing it anyway. It was the first time in my life I had ever done something necessary for myself without first asking permission from somebody older. I was 37. My hand shook the whole drive home. That claim sat quiet for a while. Then the yard met an inspection problem coming the other direction. I rented a bay in an industrial strip north of Ashland. 2,100 square feet. One overhead door. Bad roof. Cheap office. Good power. I financed a used machine, borrowed tools where I had to, bought a second-hand workbench from a closing body shop, and registered a name. North Fork Metal and Repair. The first month, I fixed a church ramp, rebuilt a farm gate, patched a dump insert, and repaired a plow frame. Then a school district called. Then a concrete outfit. Then a contractor who said he'd heard I was the one who actually returned paperwork on time. Meanwhile, for miles in the other direction, the yard kept running jobs with gaps where the paper should have been. In June, a service platform on a county facility project partially failed during installation. Not a full collapse. Not a body count. But enough. One worker went down hard enough to break his wrist and crack 2 ribs. That was bad enough. OSHA came. The county came. The insurer came. Everybody started asking for the file trail. And because of the letters I had sent, it became obvious very quickly where my signature stopped and where the blanks began. A project manager called me 4 days later asking if I would make my records available and answer questions. I said yes. Then, that same evening, for the first time in years, my father came to my house. He stood by the tailgate of his truck with his hat in his hands. My mother sat inside with the window up. My brother stood near the rear bumper looking like he wanted the gravel to open and take him down with it. My father said the work itself was sound. He said the problem was paper. Only paper. He said paper never held steel up a day in its life. Then he asked for 2 signatures. One backdated verification. One continuity log filled in after the fact. And then he offered me everything. The yard. The acreage. The buildings. All of it moved into my name by the next morning if I would sign. My mother rolled the window down a few inches and said, "Now you know what responsibility costs. Use it." My brother said only, "Don't." I told my father I'd give him an answer in the morning. Then I went inside, pulled the old file off the cabinet, and finally finished the review I should have completed the first night I got that bad feeling. Here is what I found. The old procedure sheet I had written years earlier was wrong. Not catastrophic. Not theatrical. Wrong enough. A minimum heat value below code for the material listed. My signature at the bottom in blue ink. 3 past projects built off that procedure. One of them tied to a current customer of my new shop. I sat at my kitchen table until nearly dawn doing the arithmetic on what telling the truth would cost me. My first real contract. My new business. My name in a formal nonconformance report. The kind of stain people in this trade can read for years. And underneath all of that was the last thing I had still been getting wrong. I thought the family betrayal was the whole story. It wasn't. The whole story was that truth does not become cheaper just because the person who owes it is already wounded. At 7:10 the next morning, I drove to the project trailer and handed over a written report. Page 1, Item 1 was not my father. It was not my brother. It was not the backdated logs. Page 1, Item 1 was my own old procedure deficiency. I listed the code minimum, the value I had approved, the affected projects, the recommended examination. Then I listed the current gaps at the yard and the dates attached to them. The project manager read page 1 twice and asked me if I understood what that first item was going to do to my own new company. I said yes. My father came in 9 minutes later. He got 2 pages into the report before he started shouting. Said I was killing the family name. Said I could have fixed it all with a pen. Said my grandfather put his life into that place. Then he pulled the 2 pages I had handed him months earlier from his shirt pocket, still folded, and shook them at me. He had never read them. Not once. I did not raise my voice. I said, "You never read it." And then I said, "The man who fell has kids." My father turned and walked out. Weeks later, some of the old projects I flagged got reviewed. 1 required repair. 2 passed. My new contract got suspended, then reissued later at a lower number after delays and retesting, and everybody protecting themselves exactly the way I would have told them to. It cost me badly. I ate material costs. Lost time. Sold off a nearly new saw I had just bought. Went back to smaller repair work for a while. And here is the part one did not expect. 2 contractors called me later that year because of that report, not in spite of it. One of them told me straight that anyone willing to put their own mistake on page 1 was somebody they could trust in the field. As for the old yard, here is what happened. OSHA cited them. The workers' comp audit turned up the unfiled injury. The insurance rating got hit. The county work dried up. The larger bids stopped coming. And, by September, the place was done. 10 people lost jobs, including one 19-year-old kid who had hurt no one and deserved none of it. That part is not neat, and I won't pretend it is. My claim was finally allowed. The surgery center money came back in a state check that sat unopened on my counter for a full day because I could not decide whether reimbursement counted as justice when the joint still clicked every morning on the stairs. The tractor sold that summer. It had barely done more than move a few pallets. My father never called. My mother has never once mentioned my limp. My brother works for a municipal fleet shop now. Hourly. Honest work. Last spring he tested at a third-party center under an inspector who had never heard his last name and passed clean. He texted me a photo of the card. I wrote back 1 word. Good. North Fork Metal and Repair is still small. 2 people most weeks. 3 on busy ones. The machine is paid off. We did 7 public jobs last year and closed on 6 of them because people had read that report with my name on it and decided they'd rather deal with a woman who tells the truth than a man who keeps promising paper can be fixed later. On Saturdays, my niece Willa comes by and sweeps the bay for $10 and a root beer. She is 11. Last week she stopped in front of the wall behind my bench where I've hung those old tags from the milk crate plus 2 new ones from this year and asked when she gets to test. I didn't promise her anything. I handed her a scrap coupon and a hammer and told her what failure looks like. If it opens, you failed. If it folds and stays shut, you passed. And it does not matter one bit whose child you are. I spent 20 years thinking I was building a claim on a place. What I was actually building was the only thing nobody in my family could sign away from me. And the morning I put my own name on my own worst mistake before I put it on anybody else's was the morning I stopped needing anyone at any kitchen table in Richland County to hand me permission, inheritance, or mercy. That's my story. A rack nobody fixed. A claim nobody filed. A tractor that mattered more than a joint until the paperwork started coming due. If somebody told you they'd handle your work injury in-house, go check your claim number this week. And if you know a woman who has been holding together a business where her name somehow never ends up on the ownership line, send this to her. I'll see you in the next one.